Oh, okay. Now can you hear me?
כן, הכל בסדר.
So, now it's going to be only me. Thank you all. Boker Tov, Tzaharaim Tovim, Erev Tov to all of you from all over the world, friends of Karanaisota. You will soon hear a briefing for one of our top generals in Israel, Mr. Giora Eiland. He's going to talk about the current situation in the Gaza Strip and in Israel. But first, some house rules, with your permission. So, you can see underneath the globe icon. It's just in between the record button and the reactions button. If you need any assistance with Spanish or Portuguese, just press it, and it'll open, and you can choose, and it'll help you with the language. That's number one. The second thing is if you have any questions.
Where's the button, gentlemen? I'm sorry.
On the lower bar.
We can't hear you.
En la parte inferior de la pantalla, dos lugares luego del chat.
עדי, אתה על מיוט.
עדי, תפתח רק אתה בבקשה מיקרופון.
Please, Edna had to mute us all. So please, let's start with house rule number 3. Please stay muted. So I won't be muted automatically. If you want to comment, you have the email that you'll see on the chat box soon, and you can have your question on the chat box as well. Now I'll go to number 1. If you need assistance with the language, on the lower bar, the black low bar, you can see the buttons participants, chat, share screen, record, and then interpretation. Just push that one, and you'll see that Spanish and Portuguese will open. You can choose that language, and you will have interpretation through that. Now, it is my pleasure to present the world chairman of Karanaisota, Mr. Sam Grundberg, who is going to say a few words of welcome, and then he will present our main speaker, Giora Eiland. So over to you, Sam. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Adi. And for all of those who may not have known who was speaking, that's Adi Geffen-Adler from here in Jerusalem, who is our regional director for Australia.
Yes.
And I'm going to invoke house rule number 3. If you can all please keep yourselves on mute. Thank you. So just a couple of quick words. First of all, as Adi mentioned, good afternoon, good evening, and even good morning in many parts of the world to all of you. Thank you for joining this very important briefing. I also want to thank our organizers, our professional team, Edna, Adi, and others for putting this together. It's really very important. There are literally hundreds of people from about 30 different countries. Obviously, we've all been following closely, and I know that you've been following closely. The past few days have been extremely difficult for the people of Israel. From the constant threat of rockets to the fear and the anxiety, and from when the sirens start to when the sirens finish, and just as we were sitting here looking at our telephones and looking on the news, seeing recently siren attacks and in different places in Israel. And it's very difficult to really describe the intense emotions that we're all feeling. But one thing I can tell you, having been in touch with many of you and many leaders around the world, the strong sense of solidarity and care, and knowing that all of you stand and care so much and how central Israel is in all of your lives, it really means so much. So it's important for me, first of all, to thank all of you for taking the time to be part of this briefing, not only because you're here in order to hear the wise words from Major General Giora Eiland, who I'll formally introduce in a moment, but because you're here in a show of support for Karanaisota and for the people of Israel. We've launched now a Karanaisota Solidarity Campaign, in which we ask all of you and all of our friends and supporters around the world to remain and continue dedicated to standing united with Karanaisota and all of the people of Israel And we hope that you can continue to support the various areas that are especially in need with an extra special sense of urgency. It's now an honor for me to introduce our speaker. We're privileged to have Major General Giora Eiland with us here today to discuss the events that have taken place over the past several days and the current security situation. Major General Giora Eiland is the former head of the National Security Council of Israel, the Malal, an office he held following an illustrious career in the Israeli Defense Forces, including as head of the planning branch and head of the operational branch. Today, he is the owner, the head of Giora Eiland Limited Company, which provides high-level strategic consultancy for governments, think tanks, and other organizations, along with other partners of this. Thank you, Major General Giora Eiland, for taking the time and to be with us here today and to address our Karanaisota friends and supporters and leaders from all around the world and all across the globe. Please, Major Giora Eiland, the microphone and the computer screen is yours.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It is my privilege, honor, and pleasure to speak with all of you today. Es mi placer estar con ustedes esta tarde, and I'll try to give you explanations in regard to four main points. One of them is the background, how exactly we found ourselves within few days in such a very severe situation on two fronts. One of them is vis-a-vis Gaza, the other is an internal problem within Israel. The second is what is the current situation, and I will focus on the military action. And number three is the what might develop in the next few days and what might be the consequences for maybe a longer period of time. 2 words of basic background. I guess that most of you do understand or do know it, but just to put everything or everyone on the same page. The Palestinian territories are divided not only geographically from the West Bank to Gaza Strip, but also politically. So actually Hamas, which is a very strong political religious movement, took control of Gaza about 15 years ago, and they actually created an independent state in Gaza. So Gaza is de facto a state. Usually whenever we try to ask ourselves what is a state, what is a country if you want, then there are four characteristics. Number one, there is very clear area of control of the country. Number two, there is an efficient and effective central government. Number three, this entity has an independent foreign policy. And number four, they have their own army, so their own armed forces. So whenever we try to analyze what is the situation in Gaza, then we can say that Gaza is de facto a state led by very extreme people. Nevertheless, it is a state. This is an important insight, and I will return to this matter toward the end of my presentation. Now, in the past few years, the Palestinian issue, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in a way, was removed from the table. I mean, the whole world was preoccupied with the coronavirus, with other problems. Many of the Arab countries prefer to focus on other things, including to establish new relations with Israel. And it seems that the Palestinians are not important to anyone. And since Gaza is a very small place with a lot of problems, then the leadership of Gaza, the government of Gaza, if you want, which is the Hamas, was looking for an opportunity to attract attention and to return to the center, I would say, of the international media and the international foreign relations, etc. And they took advantage of two things that happened. Number one, which is an internal Palestinian dispute, but it has a very strong effect. And this is the fact that in the past 15 years, there was no election in the Palestinian Authority. And to be honest with you, no one really demanded from the Palestinians to establish or to run another election, because both Israel, the United States, and in a similar way we can speak about Egypt, Jordan, and other countries, preferred to be where we are and not to run an election in which Hamas might take over not only Gaza, but also the West Bank. But about 6 months ago, as a result of a domestic pressure within the Palestinian population, the president of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen, declared that by the 22nd of May this year, which is about a week or less than a week from today, there will be an election to the parliament, and months later, an election for the presidency. So the Hamas was very happy because they were confident that they were going to win. And then about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Abu Mazen understood the situation and decided unilaterally to cancel the election. So Hamas is like a child that whenever you give him a new toy, is very happy, but when you take it, the new toy out of his hand, then he begins to cry. So this is a Palestinian, let's say, internal matter, but does have an effect on Israel. And the second thing is certain developments in Jerusalem that I must admit, we Israel made some mistakes, the Israeli police and others. Some of them are really unforgivable. I don't know how exactly we made those mistakes, especially in this very, very delicate time of the months of Ramadan. And it created a lot of frustrations among many of not only the Palestinians, but many Arabs in Israel or around Israel. And Hamas decided to take advantage of this frustration or this growing tension. And they said, well, this is our time to enter the arena again and to try to show everyone how influential we can be. So 3 days ago, they opened, if you want, a kind of a surprise attack against many other Israeli towns and cities, but especially against Jerusalem. They did not really reach Jerusalem, but this was the target. They did hit certain settlements or certain towns near or west of Jerusalem, but it created, of course, a lot of noise because it was in a way a little unprecedented, and it happened to be on the Jerusalem day as we celebrate it, so it created a lot of, let's say, responses and emotions. And this by itself is actually the beginning of the new conflict as we are right now. And we must be, let's say, frank and say that by doing so, Hamas did take risk, but there is no doubt that he made a very successful strategic move, because he now can claim that it is not only that he's defending the Palestinians in Gaza, and not only the Palestinians in the West Bank, and not only the other Arabs, but also all Muslims all around the world, because he is the party that is fighting for Jerusalem. He's fighting for the area of the Temple Mount, of Al-Aqsa, as they call him. And he is, if you want, the new Salah ad-Din that is fighting for the Muslims against the foreigners that in this case are the Jewish. Many years ago, there were the Christians and or the Crusaders. So by presenting himself as the savior of the Muslims, who is protecting the holy place of the Muslims in Al-Aqsa, he managed to get a lot of, to gain a lot of points. And this by itself is, of course, a very significant matter. Now, Israel, of course, did not have any other chance but to retaliate. And the situation today is that Hamas continues to launch rockets into Israel. Only a few hours ago, about 100 rockets were launched. Unfortunately, they managed to develop quite impressive capacity in the past 7 years, and they are using it partially successful. So far, if I'm not wrong, about 6 or maybe 7 Israelis have been killed and dozens were wounded, which is not very nice. Of course, we do retaliate, and the Israeli attacks are much more successful than the way that they are perceived in the media. And we are not speaking about some specific silver bullet that we have that can change everything. but some of the results or some of the achievements are incremental. And for instance, they have dozens of places in which they produce their weapons and rockets, and so far we managed to destroy most of them. Now, it does not have an immediate effect on the existing situation because they are launching the existing rockets, but when it might be over, they will find that they actually lost significant element of their capabilities. Also, we managed to intercept in one bomb 6 of their supreme, I would say, engineers and scientists. 6 people does not sound very impressive, but just you can think about how much efforts Israel is making in order to intercept one important scientist in Iran. So if you manage to intercept or to kill all 6 people who are responsible for the R&D, research and developments of the military capacity of Hamas in one shot, it is influential. And also they have a lot of assets, including the big buildings that belong to the elites of Hamas, to the leaders, to their families, where the offices are. And by doing it in a very, let's say, systematic way, much of their capacity is going to be taken away. And the goal of the IDF so far is quite humble one. We are not trying to destroy Hamas. It is probably not achievable in the short run, but we might cause them such a damage that at least they will reconsider for quite a long time whether or not to begin such a, let's say, adventure again. Something about the tactics that is used, because there is a lot of criticism against Israel, and I was interviewed by certain foreign media, and everybody says, well, there are about, let's say, 100 casualties in Gaza. Many of them are civilians. And in Israel, there are only 6 people who were killed. So it means that you are using unproportional, which is of course not true. We managed to protect our people by very effective anti-missile defense system, but it doesn't mean that we are not in an attack, under attack, a massive attack. And whatever we are trying to do in Gaza is extremely careful. And I'll give you some examples. First, all the launchers that Hamas has, and we are speaking about 700 or 800 launchers and about 7,000 rockets, all of them, 100% of them are deliberately located either within school hospitals or very near to these, let's say, civilian facilities. So, of course, if you want to attack them, by definition, you attack, let's say, a civilian target. Number 2, the big buildings that we are attacking right now, which are very important assets of Hamas, we don't attack them out of the blue. We call by phone the doorman of these buildings, and we say, well, we are going to attack and destroy this building, make sure that all the people are evacuating the buildings. Or we do shoot a very, very small ammunition on the roof of the building just to signal to the people, we are going to attack you soon with a big bomb, so you should hurry and leave the buildings. And I don't think that any armed forces all around the world, including the Americans, the British, and others that fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, or elsewhere, did use this kind of very, very careful tactics. So whenever Israel is accused by, let's say, this kind of unproportional force, it is, of course, a complete lie. I must say you in this regard, on the one sentence, 7 years ago, there was another Israeli big operation. At that time, in 2014, it did include also a ground operation. And after that, a group of about 9 or 10 generals, very high generals, including the commander of the armed forces of Italy and the commander of the armed forces of Germany, and retired American, British generals and retired generals from Colombia and from other places came to Israel and made an independent investigation about the tactics that Israel used. And their conclusion and their report said that they have never seen something similar to what we did. We have also to remember that all the ammunition that we fire against Gaza, all of it is an accurate or precise ammunition that is used in the most possible careful way. However, as I said, if all the enemy is located within very heavily populated area, then of course civilians are killed and there is no other way to prevent it. As today, there could be two scenarios to what might happen in the next few days. One of them is that within few days there will be a growing voices all around the world for a ceasefire. Hamas is already ready for a ceasefire because they do suffer from this very massive attacks. And if the Israeli forces or the IDF believes in 2, 3, 4 days that we managed to accomplish at least most of the mission and the destruction of the Hamas military capacity was severely damaged, then Israel might agree to a ceasefire and it might be over. The other scenario is that it is not going to be enough and we might conduct a ground operation. Anyway, the ground operation is well prepared, but the decision whether or not to execute it is at least not known to people like me. I'm now a civilian and I'm not part of the decision-making people. So this is, of course, if we commit ourselves to ground operation by itself, it means that the operation will last longer because ground operation usually do not last a day or two. Usually it is a matter of much more days, could be 2, 3 weeks. And I personally believe and hope that we can save it. So this is what is happening right now. Now, the more important question is what happens next. And I think that this is something that I will say frankly to you. In the past 15 years, the policy of the government of Israel, although it was never been officially declared, was to do something similar to what we are doing right now, which means that as long as there is calm and no fire, then everybody is happy. And when the fire begins from the other side, then we retaliate. Sometimes it is on a very low profile. Sometimes the escalation is similar to what we can see today. And after a few days, sometimes few weeks, when this cycle of violence ended, we return to normal. I think that this kind of policy has come to an end. I think that it did not prove to be good enough, effective enough, and of course not a policy that can convince the people of Israel, especially those who live near Gaza or in the cities of Ashkelon and Sderot, that this should continue to be the Israeli policy. And I believe that after this operation is over, we will make a real new reassessment about the right strategy vis-a-vis Gaza. It is not a simple question, but there could be probably more than one way to try to solve it. Just to give you 2 possible hints. One of them is to do a much larger military operation, including ground force operation, but it will not start as a retaliation to an enemy that is well prepared, but it might start with an Israeli surprise. And since most of the Hamas leaders and capabilities are now down deep underground, because they were well prepared, it became much more difficult for us to achieve the desirable results. But if we do it as a deliberate, proactive initiative of Israel in the right time, in the right way, I believe that much different results can be achieved. So this is, if you want, one way. But there could be even a different way of thinking. And one of the important things is try to compare between what is happening in Gaza today to what is happening, or actually is not happening, in Lebanon. In Lebanon, as I guess most of you know well, Lebanon is a country that is practically controlled by Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a very strong Shia semi-military organization, and Hezbollah is about 10 times stronger than Hamas. They hate us much more than Hamas hate us, and they are strongly supported by Iran. Nevertheless, they do keep silent for the past 15 years. And someone can ask himself why Hezbollah is so careful and it keeps, I would say, the calm along the border, while Hamas is very happily moving forward and push the trigger whenever he is frustrated. And the answer is very simple. Hezbollah is operating from Lebanon. It is, like Hamas, a political religious movement that is very careful and very delicate and very sensitive to public opinion within Lebanon, because it is a political movement. Now, Lebanon, although they do have a lot of economic problems today, is a very prosperous country in which they have air force and seaports and power stations and a lot of infrastructure and a very high level of living, especially in the big city, very similar to what is happening in the West. And Hezbollah understands that if he initiates a war against Israel today, then the results will be a destruction of the infrastructure of Lebanon, something that the people of Lebanon will not be able to tolerate. And because they are sensitive to this kind of public opinion, they are very careful not to drag ourselves and them into such an adventure. Whenever we look at Gaza, Gaza is a terribly poor area where there is nothing to lose there. I mean, there is no infrastructure. The electricity is only for 4 days a day. There is a shortage in running water. The sewage is running in the streets. The unemployment among the young people is 70%, 70%. There are a lot of health problems there, besides the corona. So actually it's a miserable area. So the leadership of Gaza, the government of Gaza does not make any, does not take any risk when they open fire because they have nothing to lose. And I think that we might need to change, I would say, our paradigm vis-a-vis the state of Gaza, because the more civilian infrastructure they have, the more they might be able to lose. And this formula works very well in Lebanon, and I think that we might consider similar policy vis-a-vis Gaza. So far, this is about Israel and Gaza in a real nutshell. The second point that I would like to say in a very, very few minutes, because time is running out quickly, is the internal problems in Israel between Arabs and Israeli and Jewish people. Now, in the past 73 years, we managed to create a reasonable relations between the Jewish people and the Arab people in Israel. And the Arabs in Israel consist about 21% of the population. It's a minority, but it is a very, let's say, significant minority. And despite the tension and despite the, I would say, the very uncomfortable situation in which the Palestinians, Israelis live, which they are supposed to be or expected to be loyal to the state of Israel, and at the same time, they are part of what they call the Palestinian nation, which is our enemies in Gaza and the West Bank. So there is a lot of tension, and we still managed to find a way to live together. And one of the most successful years was the past year of the corona, where the communities did help each other, and it was a symbol of partnership and cooperation. More than that, for the very first time, until 3 days ago, it was almost clear that we are going to have a new government that will be, for the first time, supported by an Arab party that they got, I would say, the legitimacy from both the Palestinian or the Arab Israelis on one hand, and the majority of the people, the Jewish people of Israel on the other hand. And then we entered this problem, and suddenly we saw a terrible confrontations and collisions between young Jewish and young Arabs in many, many places. It began by the Arabs. It began by Muslims in certain cities like Lod, Akko, and elsewhere. when dozens or hundreds of young militant and aggressive people attack not only Jewish property and synagogue and apartments, but also people, and at least in 2 cases, they were very close to accomplish a lynch against accidental people that happened to be there. Unfortunately, we could see last night a retaliation of very extreme Jewish people who came to the city of Bat Yam, which is near Jaffa, south of Tel Aviv, and they tried to do something they did something very similar, either to shops that are owned by Arabs, or they even tried to carry out a lynch against Arab citizens. And this by itself created, I would say, tension that I think that has never been in Israel, or at least has never been in the past 21 years. We had something similar in the year 2000s, but I think that today the wave of violence is higher, and from the geographic point of view, it is spreading to too many places simultaneously. Now, when we try to understand how something like this could happen, when we began to understand that the incorporations of Arab people within the Israeli academy, business, politics, even in the army, was much more successful, how could it happen? Now, there could be two explanations that contradict each other, and I believe that both of them are correct, although many people focus only on the first one. The first, let's say, the ordinary, the conventional explanation, especially of the leaders of the Arab communities, is that this reaction of young Arab people is a reflection of despair, frustration. Many of them don't find a job. They feel that they are treated not in a nice way by the Jewish people. They are treated in, let's say, as an inferior people. So this is a reflection of frustration and despair. Now, this is, I would say, one explanation. I'm afraid this is not the only and maybe even not the main explanation. And the other explanation is that the reason for their behavior is not a frustration, but the opposite of frustration, which is hope. Hope for what? Hope to participate and to achieve the goal of Hamas and the goal of many others, which are explicitly to bring to the end of the state of Israel, or at least to bring to the end of Israel as a Jewish state. Now, I saw yesterday evening there was, the TV, of course, was in the city of Lod. By the way, 5 minutes drive from the international airport, Ben Gurion. And young Arabs were asked, why you do what you do? And many of them on camera said, because we support Hamas. We think that time has come to end the state of Israel. We support the ideology of Iran that says that Israel should be wiped off the map. This is something that this kind of, let's say, of a spirit, or this kind of a trend that so far was kept below the radar is probably much stronger than what we believed or what we wanted to believe. And this is by itself much more dangerous. Now, the last point, the last sentence about that, I think that the police of Israel failed to treat these, let's say, riots, very violent riots as they happened yesterday night.
Please stay muted. Please stay muted.
Por favor, no puedo hablar. The people of the Israeli police failed not only to suppress, to stop or to contain these violations yesterday night or the night before, but I think that certain actions that are expected today have not been taken. For instance, today the technology, especially the technology of face recognition, enable a police to easily look at the video clips as they are broadcast all the day, and to identify very easily all the people who were involved, to know what are their identity, whether they were Arabs or later Jewish people, and to bring all these people to custody and to, I would say, to a rapid process of trials.
Fizeram
I think
rápido
unless something
processo
like this
nesta
happens,
tentativa de reconhecimento.
unless something like this happens in the next 24, 48 hours, we might not be able to contain it and to create the right deterrence vis-a-vis young nationalists, whether they are Arabs or minority of Jewish people. And the only successful thing that the Israeli society managed to do in the past dozens of years might be destroyed. So this is very delicate matter and not less important than what we can see between Israel and Gaza. So far what I could say in about 30 minutes, and I'm waiting for your questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Giora. It was an eye-opener for all of us. I have a few questions, and I would like to start with the questions that I am being asked by a lot of Israelis, and I'm sure that all the audience here are very interested in. We know how strong the IDF is, and we listen and hear all the time in the media that the IDF has a lot of plans, and they haven't even started yet to use the full power that they can harness. So do you agree with those comments that we hear in the media? And the second question is, why don't they use it in the beginning, and why don't they use it? Because we do want to end it on our end, of course.
I think that those who create the perception as if we have still unbelievable magic secret weapons that we are going to use them soon and they will change the situation dramatically within few hours or even few days. Those who present it are in a way misleading, although they don't necessarily mean to do it. And so whenever you fight against area like Gaza, many of the superiorities of the IDF and the excellent capabilities as we could see them over the skies of Syria, Lebanon, or elsewhere are eroded by the simple fact that there are so many civilian people there and you are restricted to do it. And the other way is to carry out a ground operation, but ground operation usually is entitled with casualties, longer duration, and might be other problems. So there is no magic solution, military solution to Gaza, at least not today. It might be different if we begin an operation as a result of our initiative, but this is a different story. So, but at the same time, as I said, the achievements are much more significant than the way that they are perceived. Of course, Hamas will deny it. And I think that when this cycle will end, I guess in between few days to a week, Hamas will find that he lost many or much of their capacity, much more than what he could expect. And at least this might create, I would say, certain period of a calm and deterrence, but this is not a solution. As I said, from the strategic point of view, we have to reevaluate the situation and probably carry out a different strategy than this kind of cycles of violence every few months or even every few years.
There is a question, thank you. There is a question here, how it is possible that Hamas has so many launchers and so many missiles, and I continue the question that I just saw, where are they almost completely blockaded? We control the sea, we control both, well, almost all the border. The only border that we do not control is the border that they have with Egypt. And I might add a second part to that question. If they have, you probably know that, but how come they are able to continue to fire all the time and we can't stop their firing capability? And after 3 days of fighting with our mighty Air Force and drones and lasers and all that, what's their tactics and their strategy? How can they avoid that?
I'll start with the second question. they managed to build a very effective system where hundreds, hundreds of launchers of rockets are kept and buried deep in the ground. And only whenever they decide that a specific launcher has to launch, they open a small window for about 10 seconds and they fire, and then this window is closed, and all this, let's say, window is about 30 meters below the ground, and above it you can have, let's say, only a ground that if you fail to intercept it in the right moment, it is well protected. So I don't want to create any illusions. The continuous of fire, we will see the fire continues until the last day, whenever the last day will come, because we can destroy much of their capabilities. We cannot eliminate it totally. And in regard to their way to build such a very impressive military capacity, although they are under Israeli blockade, this is quite a successful way. Today, as everybody knows, most of the information and the know-how are sent to them by mails, by the internet, by Iranian engineers and others. And so the know-how does not necessarily need that the people will send to Iran or elsewhere in order to learn how to do it. It is done by the internet, and they really managed to build quite an impressive military capacity. And at least in this regard, we have to give them the right credit for being able to do it, because this is something that is quite challenging.
Okay, thank you. Another question that I just received through the email is, how long do you think Hamas can hold in this round if we do not launch a ground attack?
Generally speaking, they can last weeks. I have to tell you, again, they managed to build a real underground city, which is a reflection of the upper city, or the upper, not only city, upper land, if you want, about 30 meters below the ground, with a lot of tunnels, with where they keep ammunition, food, water, whatever, and the leadership continues to be there, and they don't really care how much destruction will be above and how many people will be killed. And as far as they're concerned, every day that they manage to continue fighting against Israel is a kind of achievement. So on one hand, they would be interested to end this cycle today, because they believe that strategically, not necessarily militarily, they managed to achieve what they wanted. But on the other hand, they can sustain for a few weeks without any problems, and we have to acknowledge that.
Thank you for that. There are a lot of questions through the chat and through emails, and I'll try to combine the question to one, or all the questions to one. It's about our neighbors. What about Egypt? What about Jordan? What about Syria? Someone even asked about Russia. How's the area reacting to what we see now? And is there any chance for another front?
Let's start with the second part of your question. We have to remember that our main enemy is not Hamas. Even from the simple military point of view, our main enemy is what we call the Northern Front, that includes Hezbollah in Lebanon, that is much more powerful than Hamas. The Shia militias that Iran is trying to establish in Syria. So far, we managed to stop it and to prevent it to a certain extent, but it is still, let's say, a very significant possible threat. And Iran itself, with its existing capabilities and with its ambitions to develop nuclear weapons. This is our main concern. And this is, if you want, indirectly one of the reasons why we do not want, and why, at least so far, we prefer to make certain compromises vis-a-vis Gaza, because we didn't want to commit ourselves or to commit the armed forces too much to Gaza while we have a much heavier potential enemy in the north. But as I said, we do manage to deter our enemies in the north, especially Hezbollah, for the reasons that I explained. Speaking about Sunnis countries like Jordan and Egypt, we don't have to have any illusions. Neither Jordan nor Egypt are interested in any calm and silence between Israel and Palestinians. Both of them do enjoy whenever there is crisis between Israel and Gaza or Israel and the West Bank. So we cannot expect that they will really try to resolve the problem. Egypt is careful only when they understand that the fighting in Gaza might have any effect on Sinai in Egypt, and this is something that might be dangerous for them. Other than that, we are quite alone in this situation. I don't think that we can rely on any, let's say, political or other assistance of others. And as I said, despite the difficulties and the frustration, I believe that we can end this cycle with quite a nice achievements and create relatively long period of relative time or relative calm. The question is whether or not we will be able to use this situation and to prepare something more successful than the existing policy that, as I said, lasts for the past 15 years.
Thank you. I'm going to ask two more questions and then we'll have to finish, unfortunately. One of them is being asked by René, and it looks on foreign media, and maybe it's the right time to tell our audience so they will be able to spread the word to others that we intervened with Ramadan, and through their holiest month, we went with police to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and we did a lot of things in order to provoke the Israeli Arabs. So Hamas was inclined to go into an operation. You and I know that that's not the truth, but I think hearing it from you, what's the real reason for Hamas to join this operation will help a lot of people here to explain it to others.
Of course, we did not provoke it, let's say, deliberately. On the contrary, the policy of the governments of Israel in the past, at least 10 years, vis-a-vis the Palestinian problem is that we probably cannot solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the near future. So let's try to manage the conflict rather than to solve it. And to manage the conflict means that we should avoid any unnecessary confrontations and to be very careful not to create triggers that do not really serve the real policy. So we don't have any interest to create any provocation whatsoever. However, we did make 3 mistakes in Jerusalem. I'll say in a few words what they were. There were mistakes, terrible mistakes, if you want, stupid mistakes. Nevertheless, it was a mistake and nothing no real intentions beyond that. The very first one is that there is a gate in East Jerusalem. It's called the Nablus Gate or the Shechem Gate or Damascus Gate. All of them are the same area. When there is, let's say, a kind of a small open theater for the Palestinians, where young Palestinians or young Arabs used to gather them, especially in the nights of Ramadan. And for some stupid reasons, the Israeli police decided to close this area and not to enable those Arabs to gather in this area. And this created a frustration and anger that I can understand. And this was the beginning, I would say, of this tension. It happened about 10 days or 2 weeks ago. The second one is the Day of Jerusalem, which is an Israeli kind of, let's say, non-religious holiday that happened to be on the last 2 days of Ramadan or last 3 days of Ramadan. And this kind of holiday includes ceremonies, parades, dancing, and many other things in the heart of the old city, very, very close to a lot of religious, sensitive Arab sites. And I personally advised, whoever I could advise, let's delay, let's postpone this celebration in a week, to do it after the Ramadan and after Eid al-Fitr, which is the biggest Palestinian the biggest Muslim holiday that begins tonight, by the way. So we can create some kind of a buffer between their sensitive days and our sensitive day. But this kind of recommendation, unfortunately, was not accepted. So we created certain ceremonies that were perceived by the Palestinians as if they were provocations against them, simply because they happened to be in the wrong place and especially in the wrong time. And the third mistake that we made, which is a different story, it is very complicated to explain, but because of some stupid law in Israel, according to existing Israel law, we have the right to evacuate dozens of Palestinians families who live in certain Arab neighborhoods of Sheikh Jarrah, which is an Arab neighborhoods. People who live there in about 60 or 70 years, and they got the permission to live there from the former regime of Jordan, whenever Jordan still controlled this area of Jerusalem. But according to the Israeli law, we have the privilege or the right to evacuate them and to let Jewish families to purchase and to enter these houses. Now, this is the most stupid mistake that can be made. No one can explain or justify such a move. It is too complicated from the legal point of view, and no one in the world, and especially not in the Arab world, is interested to be convinced by this, let's say, complicated legal jurisdictional explanation. And this problem was well identified long time ago by many. To be humble or not humble by me, 7 years ago I began to write about that. Nevertheless, the Israeli court decided, according to the Jewish or to the Israeli existing law, that such an evacuation of Palestinian families can be executed. So these three mistakes made by us without any real, let's say, evil intent created the atmosphere that was successfully used by Hamas to create the dangerous linkage between Hamas in Gaza, the holy place of Jerusalem to the Muslims, and the Arab Israelis. And now it is a big fire. And now we have to be, let's say, smart enough in order to try to finish this fire, that we could prevent it in the first place.
Okay, so last question, and I hope you will be comfortable with answering it, because I know it's not your turf, you're not a politician, but a lot of people asking, is this situation with Gaza and with Israel is going to affect the new government, the change of governments, maybe fifth elections? What is your prediction, or what are the 3 or 4 or 2 scenarios that we can see in the political arena?
Before this crisis began, only 4 days ago, it seemed that we were going to have a new government, which is the government of a change, as they call it, which is not a government led by Netanyahu, but by many, many parties that are against him and his bloc, that in order to create this coalition, there was a kind of support, or at least an implicit support, of at least one of the 2 Arab parties. And at least one of those Arab parties did express their willingness to support this new coalition. So according to the expectations 4 days ago, we could be today in a new political situation when new government is established in Israel. Now, of course, when this violence began, and of course, as long as a support of an Arab party is needed, and because of the tension today between Jews and Arabs, it is much more hard to do it. There is a beginning to be a change in the predictions in Israel that claim that such a coalition is probably not possible today. And since Netanyahu cannot establish other coalition, so we are in a deadlock, and we might need to go for the fifth time in the past 2 years to an election, which is by itself a terrible, miserable result, but it might happen. So if you ask me today, good chances that we might go to another election, although both sides, the parties of the Change coalition are still trying to maintain what they managed to agree so far, including with this Arab party. And at the same time, Netanyahu is trying to persuade at least one of the parties that belong to the other camp that since we are in an emergent situation, join me and let's reestablish the existing governments again. So I don't know, I'm not an expert for internal political matters in Israel. I really don't know what will be the results, but there is no doubt that the last events did influence or are influencing the existing political situation in Israel.
Thank you, Giora. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for joining us and helping us to learn more with what's happening in Gaza and in Israel. And I want to say to our friends in Karanaisota, more than 500 computers joined this session. And I can't tell you enough, as an Israeli living here in Israel, not sleeping for 2 days because of we are being bombed, to see you all here joining us in solidarity, supporting us. It means the world to us in Karanaisota, to the people of Israel. We are united. We are all together. So I thank you again for joining us. I thank you again, Giora, for your time and for this lecture. And hopefully we will meet again in more happy circumstances, celebrating something, or at least not in circumstances like that. So please pray for us, and we will continue to be strong as long as you're backing us and you're behind us. Thank you very much all, and God bless. תודה, גיורא.
בבקשה.
שלום.
תודה רבה.
תודה רבה, עדי.
Thank
you so much, and let's hope and pray that this
Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much from Argentina. Thank you very much.
Muy bueno.
Excelente.
That's excellent.
Shalom from Amsterdam. Shalom, shalom.
שלום, תודה רבה.
תודה רבה.
We are with our
הסברה מאוד חשובה.
Thank you from Argentina.
Gracias desde Costa Rica. Shalom a todos.
Gracias.
Shalom, shalom.
Rio de Janeiro, Am Israel High.
Am Israel High, Panamá.
Shalom.
Shalom, Brasil.
Be safe.
Thank you very much. Am Israel Chai.
Am Israel High. תודה רבה.
And sleep in the
Am
third night.
Israel High. Am Israel High.
Amen.
The North Pole to South Pole, Am Israel Chai.
Thank you all.
ישראל חי.
שהשם ישמור על כולנו. אמן.
Amen.
Good to see such wonderful faces and nice people. Welcome from Hungary.
Oh, welcome from Hungary.
Shalom from Rio.
Köszönöm.
עם ישראל חי.
Yes, amen.
We will prevail.
Israel, from Holland with love.
From Germany,
תודה רבה.
Cologne. תודה רבה.
Danke, Deutschland.
From São Paulo, Brazil.
מקמפינס ברזיל, תודה רבה. הסברה מאוד חשובה.
תודה, תודה.
באמת.
Molto grazie.
בהצלחה.
See you soon.
It was the best interview till now.
Very good. Thank you.
תודה רבה. אני בסאו פאולו, בברזיל, והבן שלי בצבא עכשיו. אני מאוד...
יש משהו שאפשר לעזור לו? איך אנחנו יכולים לעזור לו? להגיע אליו, חבילה, פקטה, משהו.
לוסיאנה.
לבקר אותו. Please send us an email. I wish I could say it. Por favor, mensaje un email. We will help.
הוא מתקן את העולם. הוא עושה תיקון עולם. תמיד לברך אותו.
כולל בשבילו. השם ישמור אותו. חברים, באמת תודה רבה לכם.
All praying.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing what you did with your family.
You know, Luciana, what I think? I think that Israel is the best place in the world to stay because they know how to deal these kind of things. So trust Israel. Trust these people.
I'm trying to go, I'm trying to renew my passport to go also. But I'm from Brazil and they are just, it's difficult to enter there now.
Yeah, there's a travel
Mola
ban.
Hadasha, Luciana, if something I can help you, I just arrived on December. And now I have to leave this from here, not from far away. And it's different. We have a different, and we are very in good care.
Are you in Israel?
I'm in Israel, in the office of Karanaisota in Israel.
Oh, wow.
If I work for Colombia, if anything that you need, I'm gonna ask for your mail and whatever.
Great, because I am trying to get my passport, my Israeli passport, since 13 April, when my mom passed away because of COVID.
Okay.
Then when my mom passed away, I started to move my passports to go to Israel. My son is there.
Okay,
then,
and you have the right to come.
Yeah, but they are not working there because of COVID.
Yes.
And I don't have the passport. And I am like, oh my God, what can I do? I tried to talk to the consul, but I don't have his phone number.
And how is your son? Is the most important. You feel okay?
He's now in the desert doing a training. Yeah, and since last Saturday, I couldn't talk to him, but he called from the command, Menachel, called my husband and said he is okay. He called before yesterday, but I just want to go. I want
all your dreams are going to come through.
Yeah, I'm asking everybody who knows someone from the consulate that I need my passport to go.
We are going to ask or something, or in Brazil.
Yeah, I'm trying to reach them, let's see if I manage. I want to stay there also.
Just be calm, be aware, not to be afraid, and God are with us.
Yeah, I'm praying a lot here. This has to stop. We must have peace. I'm just praying for peace. I think everybody, thank you very much. I'm very glad that we are all together in this.
Luciana, nós vamos te mandar muita força, tá? Daqui. Eu moro em Buenos Aires, mas eu vou te mandar muita força, porque é uma situação tão difícil e eu me coloco no teu lugar, tá?
Obrigada.
Mas força, você vai conseguir chegar lá e vai te dar tudo certo. As crises servem para crescer. Então, você vai ver que você... Eu sou otimista e eu acho que, sei lá, esse mundo vai ter que abrir e vamos ter que encarar de outra maneira, né, o nosso futuro.
Sim, sim. Eu estou aqui entre... né, estava com minha mãe internada e eu não podia ir. Aí, quando foi ela... infelizmente não resistiu, e aí eu comecei a mexer os pauzinhos, eu vou estar lá. Meu marido conseguiu ir antes, e ele está lá, pelo menos, se acontece alguma coisa, o Pedro tem alguém, né, da família lá, porque a gente não tem família em Israel. Por sorte, meu marido conseguiu estar lá.
É um apoio, né? Agora, se você alguma coisa, eu tenho muitos amigos brasileiros em Israel, tá? Eu estudei em Israel, eu fiz uma Holi Madrechei Hutz há muitos anos atrás, mas eu tenho muitos amigos em Mefarsim, em Nitzanim, que estão no sul, em Bronheim. Então, qualquer coisa...
O que está mais me preocupando...
Você vê meu nome aí, eu me comunico com você, e qualquer coisa que precisar, eles seguramente vão te ajudar.
Ai, que bom.
Tá?
Meu telefone, se quiser, eu te passo, a gente troca um WhatsApp.
Me passa, me dá, se você quiser anotar se quiser anotar o meu, você tem um lá.
Vou pegar uma caneta aqui, peraí.
Que situação, não? Que incrível. Quer dizer, como...
Não, eu não consigo acreditar como no meio de uma pandemia, não é? Com o mundo do jeito que está, eles conseguiram ter essa atitude, né? Podiam ter dado uma trégua, né?
Hello. How old is your son? Because you are so young. You look 20.
He's 20.
Hello. Você é super jovem. You are so young. How old are you?
I am 47, almost 47.
Well, you look great. But
thank you.
In Israel, he's becoming a man, because in Betzabah they become men. They become men. So it's not anymore. And he He will train very well. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
God protect. I'm sure.
Yeah, he's in Kfar, kibbutz near Itzhak. He is in kibbutz near Itzhak. And yesterday, before yesterday, a rocket goes to the Heder Ochel. בחדר אוכל הוא היה כל היום. וזה... הלב שלי ככה.
I understand. How many children do you have?
2.
Okay. And the other one is with you?
Is here. We are just planning to go and waiting for this passport.
You will.
Patricia.
I go.
Hello.
Perdi. Você quer anotar? Oi. Hello.
Who?
Alô. Oi, Luciana. 54 911 5009 6753. Vou te repetir, 54911 5009 6753. Ai, você está muda, não estou te escutando. Você ficou muda.
Nossa, eu tô muda, sem querer.
Agora deu para.
Muito obrigada.
Não, é sempre um apoio, tá? Quer dizer, do pessoal lá, não sei muito o que eles podem fazer, mas pelo menos saber que tem alguém que possa, né? Que você possa entrar em contato, fazer alguma amizade, né? Tem Israel nesse ponto é muito aberto, com muita coisa boa, né? E espera um pouco, Eli, que eu já te falo que eu estou falando. Espera um minutinho, tá? Espera aí.
Obrigada.
Bom, então, olha, muita sorte aí, tá? E eu te desejo assim, o melhor, tá? Tá me ligando a minha neta.
Ai, vai lá. Muito obrigada. Que estejamos todos protegidos e que tenha paz. É só paz.
Você também fique tranquila que você vai ver que vai dar tudo super, super certo, viu? Tá?
Obrigada, viu? Até.
Fala aí por telefone, tá? Me liga por WhatsApp e a gente entra em contato e vamos ver o que a gente pode fazer, tá?
Muito obrigada.
Bom, beijo, querida.
Tchau. Muito obrigada. Tchau.
Bye,
pessoal.
bye a todos.
Obrigada.
Tchau.
Toda rabá. Bye.
Oi. Oi, tudo bem? Hã? Olá, Julita.
Hello. Oké, echt niet gedaan.